Matters of fact, facing our past. Tom Wegener, a German radio journalist, and Wolfram Hartmann, a Namibian Africanist historian, talk on important aspects of Namibia's controversial and painful colonial past. The aim is to facilitate a conversation, to disseminate knowledge and to infuse current debates with a sense of reconciliation, respectfully, evidence-based and soundly researched, reasonably and without one-upmanship or virtue signaling, for Namibians in Namibia, from Namibia.
While not skirting controversy and, as said, not engaging in moral grandstanding, our intention is to correlate popular and academic knowledge. The aim is to facilitate a genuine reckoning with Namibia's sore past and to challenge, in an enriching way, some of our often divisive perspectives, at the same time being cognizant of the complexity of Namibian history. Our point of departure is that colonialism was and remains a crime against humanity, somehow better captured in the all-encompassing German word Menschheitsverbrechen.
Oppo, enough. Bear with us and those for whom this is new and important. We are two of Andoichi, Tom Wegener and Wolfram Hartmann, with a most warm welcome to this podcast on Namibian history.
Oh, quite a tall order, I would say.
Indeed, and given that the 120th anniversary of the OvaHerero-German War was commemorated this year, let's see what we're coming up with on that topic. And for now, one important clarification I have to add here. There will be as thorough a treatment of the Nama-German War, the outbreak of which also had its 120th anniversary this year. Tom, I anticipate your rigorous questions and commence eagerly, and should start with a brief summary, rather outline of what I would like us to cover in this and the following releases, in as complete a narrative of the events as they unfolded over the next years. Let me be clear here. This presentation of aspects of Namibia's colonial past is scholarly in approach. I repeat, scholarly, and I'm saying this for good reason. As the actual war, starting in 1904, cannot meaningfully be separated from the ordeal suffered as from August 1904 by OvaHerero in Omaheke.
Wait, stop, Wolfram. Enlighten us about Omaheke.
Yes, Tom. Omaheke is the easternmost area of OvaHerero. OvaHerero land, a semi-desert with little water and prone to drought, into which OvaHerero chose to flee as from mid-August 1904 towards the border with modern-day Botswana, and where the first phase of the disaster was executed, more about which in a separate episode of this series of podcasts.
All right, I understand, and it is here where the German commander Trotha issued the shoot-to-kill order of October 1904, am I right?
Right, Tom. Following this genocidal edict, about which we will talk extensively and explicitly, and which was rescinded in December and replaced with the order to establish concentration camps with all the horrendous death, destruction, suffering. Let's see how this goes.
Wait. I think we need some little additional information on what you call genocidal edict.
Granted, Tom. This is the infamous shoot-to-kill order, also known as genocide or extermination order, written by Trotha, the supreme commander of the German military, with the aid of two intermediaries in OvaHerero, promulgated on 2nd October 1904 and handed for distribution to some destitute OvaHerero in the vicinity of his camp Odombozu Vindimba. In it, he made known that his soldiers would kill indiscriminately every OvaHerero found within the borders of the colony.
Oh my, horrendous. Seems like one can distinguish several phases. Why don't you start with a rundown of the actual events, kind of a chronology? One that could serve as a much-needed knowledge base for the many issues being debated, passionately, controversially, even with righteous anger in Namibia.
Definitely a good idea, yes. This war can be divided into 6 phases. Initially, yet for a very short period only, OvaHerero had the upper hand in this conflict, as the Germans were taken by surprise. The war was started on January 12th with surprise attacks on settlements, garrisons and farms the communication lines, the railway lines, looting, burning, killing, kicking off what came to be the longest, costliest, and possibly the most brutal war in the history of German colonialism.
Oh my, this is heavy stuff. Can you perhaps fill us in on the reasons for this unexpected outbreak of a full-scale war? Tell us a bit about this, as our listeners will be keen to figure out not only how this happened, but also why it occurred.
An array of grievances, amongst which trading practices, not really above board, the rapid loss of land and cattle to German itinerant traders, to merchants and settler farmers, through dubious deals, a proposed government-instituted policy of reservations for OvaHerero, the ravenous and raping sexual appetites of German men for OvaHerero women, the dishonorable adjudication of Germans and OvaHerero, and last, not really least, the arrogance, the humiliating, debasing comportment of settlers and German soldiers in the everyday between white and black were the main grievances.
Wolfram, everything you have mentioned just now had been going on for quite some while. Why did OvaHerero decide to take up arms at this point in time?
What finally sparked the outbreak is a matter of a fierce yet not concluded debate to this day. The absence of substantial military forces from OvaHerero land towards the end of 1903 and into 1904 surely facilitated the decision among OvaHerero rulers to cut loose. Governor Leutwein had moved his military to the south to quell resistance against German colonial encroachment among Bondelsrights around Wernbad. Inter-OvaHerero politics seem to have also been at play, but this again is not yet understood fully, as hard evidence for this is lacking.
Interesting. Let's maybe return to the hard facts.
This first phase of the war came to an end with the recapturing of everything that had been taken or besieged by OvaHerero. Omaruru garrison and mission station being the last in a series of German reckoning, successful across the board mostly and with few casualties on their side. This all happened in the first week of February. It is a longer story on its own, it will be told subsequently. OvaHerero casualties? Sadly, we only know circumstantially that the blood toll was extremely high, alluded to in oral history, often with the names of the important commanders.
This somehow raises the issue of your sources. How and why do we know, or don't know for that matter, how this war unfolded? I mean, from everything I have heard in Namibia, this war has sparked a huge controversy among Namibians of different ethnic and economic backgrounds and is the most contentious issue at hand.
Yes, indeed, Tom. And with some caution and from experience, you can tell any story you want about Namibians' colonial past, and everybody does. Yet, that does not make it history. I am taking my cue here from my colleague Paul Daly, who has to reckon with the same problem in Australia. Therefore, this is a pertinent question. Let me expound and start with the observation that remarkably little has been written directly on this war in the last 120 years, with a mere handful of historians only, actually by a mere handful of historians only, and a few pseudo-historians, I might add. Just have a look at the bibliography I provided on the intro screen. Two distinct bodies of primary source evidence, the one official German colonial military, the other from the missionaries of the Rhenish Mission Society, are complemented by anecdotal material, memoirs and letter editions from participants on the German side, much of which not yet processed, edited and available, and probably not really important after all. Lest I forget to say this material is exclusively written in German, and almost all the military documents did not survive the bombardment in the last weeks of the Second World War in Berlin.
Now, wait a minute, Wolfram. Are you saying there's no evidence from the other side? Can you hear the inverted commas?
I'm not saying that, but your exasperation is real for good measure. There's a huge body of oral history on this war among OvaHerero, yet, aside from the methodologically problematic aspects of such history, orally passed down through the generations, none of it is processed and available in such a way that one can readily access it. And this material is available only in OvaHerero, again a language hurdle. But we might want to get back to some real history, don't we?
I see. You are right. Please go ahead.
The second phase saw the deployment of newly arrived troops from Germany. Several battles, some victorious for Herero, some won by German forces, some ending undecided. A change in policy in the headquarters of the German military in Berlin heralded the third phase with the arrival of Trotha as the supreme commander in charge of the war, Governor Leutwein being relegated to just being that. This heralded a change in tactics and war aims. It came to its end with what is termed the Battle of Ohamakari at Kaundeka, known as Waterberg in Europeanese.
Some listeners might understand what you are referring to here, but I think others, including me, need some more background on the names you just mentioned. Who were Leutwein and Trotha exactly? Surely there are names for the OvaHerero side as well.
That is important to know. Theodor Leutwein was the Berlin-appointed imperial governor in German Southwest Africa, as the colony was called then. He had been posted to Windhoek in 1894 and is said to have pursued decidedly a policy of divide and rule. See the case of Hendrik Witbooi, who he was able to cow into providing military assistance to the Germans over the next 10 years.
Wait a moment again. Are you saying that?
Yes, Tom. This is being debated among Namibians animatedly and at times acrimoniously. This question of how the Germans were able to pull Hendrik Witbooi over to their side in their colonizing endeavor. We'll come to this rather delicate topic in the course of this series of podcasts. Hence, more about this elsewhere. Let me get back to where I was going.
Sure.
Leutwein's approach was aimed to establish German rule without actually exterminating any of the local populations, as he deemed them necessary for the future economic development of the colony as labor, and therefore to be spared from straight extermination. This policy he pursued as well during the OvaHerero War, attempting to come to some sort of non-exterminatory peace deal, a strategy that ran counter to popular opinion among settlers in the colony. More importantly, though, it was also resisted in the higher echelons of the supreme military authorities in Berlin and by the Kaiser. Leutwein was therefore demoted and replaced as commander by Ludwig von Trotha in May 1904.
Again, a question about your sources. How do we know all these things?
Well, Leutwein published his memoirs soon after return to Germany. Trotha is a bit tricky as he has only left unremarkable diaries, only recently transcribed and published. With the formal appointment of this man as Supreme Commander of the Schutztruppe, fighting was ordered to cease until such time that Trotha had arrived in the colony and reviewed the situation. His first official act was a formal declaration of war in the colony. In the same breath, he stipulated that death sentences were to be executed without recourse to formal court-martial proceedings for hostile acts by black inhabitants against German forces. Not really very difficult to see what's to come.
Okay, we heard a lot about Leutwein's and Trotha's approach, strategy and tactic-wise. What do we know about this on the side of OvaHerero?
The most important man here was Omohona Samuel Maharero. Omohona is usually translated as chief. I prefer the word ruler. He had been in charge since 1890 of one section of OvaHerero based around Okahandja. As such, he was the OvaHerero ruler who had to really contend with the German colonial onslaught, the greedy traders, the land-hungry settlers, he himself not being without his own demons and challenges. By 1904, he was at the center of OvaHerero politics vis-à-vis the German colonial administration, considered to be supreme chief, a position that was not customary among OvaHerero actually. Oh yes, I can literally hear your frowns here. Anyway, he was considered to be the Germans' main adversary, but we have to understand that he was not an autocrat, but administered his polity together with a circle of councillors.
Seems like a good idea to return to the narrative of the war for now.
Once OvaHerero had taken the decision to flee, as the Battle of Ohamakari seemed to be not really winnable, a fourth phase can be distinguished when Trotha ordered his troops to pursue genocidally the fleeing nation in an easterly direction. I alluded to this earlier. His phase ended with the formulation and promulgation of the Shoot to Kill order on 2 October. Its aim to annihilate the Herero nation from the surface of the earth for the mere reason that Xhosa had not managed to win decisively in battle, and according to his European, rather Prussian warfare norms and expectations. Mark here, we will return to this issue in one of our future editions of this podcast series.
I really hope you will expand on this in the further course of this conversation, as I have so many questions, but don't want to, for now, interrupt the flow of the narrative. You better have a list with all the issues we need to raise to make this a thorough and worthwhile exercise.
A phase of merciless, wanton persecution followed, visited upon surviving, weak, hungry, thirsty, destitute, mostly leaderless groups of OvaHerero. Many of them tried to somehow return to their ancestral lands in the West. The rescinding of the Shoot to Kill order, issued in early December by the Imperial Chancellor in Berlin and upon intervention by the Mission Society, attempting the consolidation of survivors in the concentration camps with their extraordinary high mortality, was aimed at rescuing OvaHerero as workers, as labor for the agricultural and industrial labor needs of the colony.
Wait a minute, this is a bit sort of an information overload.
Sorry, Tom, it is. But let me forge ahead so that we can start sorting and evaluating some of this in a meaningful manner. This overall genocidal time culminated in the confiscation of all tribal lands, lock, stock and barrel in August 1906, followed by the so-called native ordinances, in German Eingeborenenverordnungen, a year later, 1907. This was a set of 3 legal ordinances aimed at destroying the cultural, social and economic base of OvaHerero. This included Nama and other groups deemed to have resisted the Germans and cemented the attempted physical genocide by adding elements of cultural, social and economic genocide.
Yes, I recall this from what I have been able to learn until now. The war was an utmost catastrophe for OvaHerero in the medium and long term.
Yes, from all that can be established from what source material is available, published and unpublished. Well, that which has been seen by researchers, and I have remarked on this earlier. There was no OvaHerero nation left by the end of Xhosa's campaign, save for scattered groups of destitute OvaHerero desperately trying to survive, and mercilessly hunted down by marauding units of German colonial military in an atmosphere of hysterical fear among the colonizers and existential exterminatory dread among those on the receiving end of this. The war was officially declared over in March 1907. Several Nama and Wolfram groups could not be bothered by this and kept their resistance up way into 1909.
This really sounds like a cemetery silence having descended on the colony, a formulation I heard of in this context.
Well, that is one possible take on the situation. However, with a little knowledge covering the remaining years of German colonialism, OvaHerero, and Nama for that matter, started to rebuild their lives and social institutions. The survivors regrouped and started to thrive again, albeit under highly constraining conditions. Something we should not forget, I would say. Having introduced you and our listeners to this overview, yes, let's get back to the first phase of the war, as true to the motto of this series, facing our past. We need to lay the narrative groundwork more thoroughly, establish more factual knowledge, and get atop this intricately and complicated history.
I agree. Let's get back to the beginning of the war in January 1904.
Yes. As we have seen earlier, a war against the unpopular Germans became possible in January, when OvaHerero land was stripped of the military as it had been marched to the south, where Leutwein tried to quell insurrection against the colonial administration by Bundeswehr. OvaHerero attacked in a surprise move on January 12, 1904. Farms and shops were raided, destroyed and burned down. Arms, ammunition and provisions were commandeered, and herds of cattle were driven off. The railway and telegraph infrastructure was destroyed in such a way that the connection between Windhoek and Swakopmund could not be used any longer. and of course many were killed. The main aim of these attacks was to expel the Germans from OvaHerero land. That this happened spontaneously and without due consideration, as is often maintained, cannot be arguably supported. Telltale signs of an impending outbreak of hostilities, some of which had already been observed since March 1903, were either ignored or misinterpreted. The Germans were caught unawares, therefore, by surprise. OvaHerero warriors attacked vulnerable farmers and traders in a triangular area between Okahandja, Karibipa and Omaruru. 123 people were murdered. According to the information on the plinth panel of the now dismantled equestrian monument, the Reiterdenkmal, 116 men, 6 women and 1 child were killed.
Are there any hints at a proper declaration of war by OvaHerero?
While a written formal call to arms has not survived, a formal declaration of war by Samuel Maharero can safely be assumed. It certainly would not have been something in the line of an extermination order, however, as is maintained among some Namibians, and ably demonstrated by a document widely circulated then and repeated to this very day, Samuel Maharero's written call to contain the unlashed violence, his appeal to hedge in his warriors' suddenly unshackled brutal terror. This document is stored in the archives of ELCRN, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in the Republic of Namibia, as a hand-copied version in OvaHerero. In it, Samuel Maharero calls for restraint, to not touch the English, Basters, Damaras, Namas, and Boers. His followers are implored to not inform the missionaries of this either. Aside from the fact that this order indicates strategic planning and political thinking, it also implies that war had been planned for a while. The document even suggests, by implication though, that a formal declaration of war had been issued, to which this one is kind of a sequel.
Yes, I recall this call for restraint by Samuel Maharero. We elaborated on this already in one of our podcast episodes in German though. But I have heard Samuel Maharero was not universally accepted as supreme chief among OvaHerero. Could you talk a bit to that?
Sure. Samuel Maharero considered himself the supreme commander of all OvaHerero forces. However, due to the loose power structures among OvaHerero, his position as paramount chief was not unanimously accepted. Not all OvaHerero groups followed Samuel Maharero's summons to attack the Germans. OvaHerero, who were under Zarawa at Chimbingwe and Chiseseta at Omaruru, did not immediately follow his call to arms, and when they did so, only reluctantly. This weakened OvaHerero efforts considerably, and it affected the way in which the war was fought, as the Germans did not face a closely ranked OvaHerero military formation.
Seems we had a situation with two highly unequal military formations and very different strategic and tactical philosophies.
Yes, indeed. Surprise was the decisive element in the first days of this conflict, and is, as such, a defining element of specific OvaHerero warfare, not so much of European warfare. But this is an entirely different, very important aspect of the war, these different approaches. I'd rather we discuss this topic in one of our next episodes.
Agreed, as we still need to discuss the course of the war in more detail. The question of different warfare approaches and styles can be kept for our next episode indeed.
Sure, good idea. Conclusion-wise, let me wrap up. Despite indications that something in the line of an insurrection was afoot, the start of this war caught the Germans unawares. Notwithstanding, OvaHerero were not able to dictate the course of the conflict for more than the first few days, and despite the large-scale destruction of infrastructure, German forces soon were able to recoup the upper hand in this conflict. And this indeed raises questions of tactic and strategy. This would be it from my side of this episode.
Sure, let me reiterate. Let us continue this conversation in the next episode with a more detailed narrative of what happened, and look at some of the factors that determined the events unfolding after mid-January 1904 in more detail. Do you want to add something before we clock off?
Oh, sure. Saying what is and was without caution, yet with trepidation in these episodes, would have been impossible without an immaterial, nonetheless absolutely important, effective, emotional OvaHerero presence in my childhood. The little boy growing up in Oshivanda craved and received what little was possible in terms of being seen, with a sense of attunement, consonance, so necessary for toddlers, from Margarete. She was around every Monday and Tuesday to wash and iron the family's laundry, when she graciously doled out what was possible in terms of emotional care in the racist atmosphere of those years. To think that she would have experienced and therefore carried in her body and soul the genocidal times, well, the Okanashi in me will not forget this ever. Thank you, Tom. Your input, professional and enthusiastic, is what makes this endeavor possible. I hope for many more podcasts driven by your questions. I extend gratitude without end. Dear Catherine Haywood, thank you for inserting your Namibian soul, a great gift indeed, and helping us to not commit too many murderous attempts at the King's language, graciously acknowledged. Hans Bierkes knows why we are thanking him. It means a lot to be validated by one of the credible old men from the liberation struggle. Tusen tak en baie dankie. Likewise, Edward Meyer's support, material and immaterial, affirms this attempt at contributing to a balanced and conciliatory discussion of Namibian history. Herzlichen Dank. And really highly motivating, the same kind of support from my brother Burkhard. Dankeschön, vergelt's Gott. Matthias Häusler's groundbreaking work has sharpened, even facilitated many an argument. Thank you. Gerhard Spoel en Ernstals bydrae tot Namibiese historiografie was en is nog altyd baanbrekend en sal definitief meer moet aangewend word ten spyte van ongegronde vooroordele teen Afrikaans. Ek het baie by julle ontledings van hierdie geskiedenis gebaat. Dis 'n baie groot dankie. My oorseese kollegas kon regtig baie by julle geleer het. And of course, for you, the listeners, the biggest thank you.
Yes, almost nothing to add except a big thank you to you, Wolfram, for all the content you present to us as a Namibian historian and expert. I know you do not take this for granted, and you always put in a lot of effort preparing these podcast episodes. It would not work without you at all. And a big thank you to our listeners, the ones that have followed us for a while already, but also to the new listeners that you are willing to follow our conversation on Namibian colonial history. Thank you and see you soon.